Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this is the final debate on this year's budget. And frankly, we're on the second to last week of Parliament, and this is the last will and testament of this government. And what a grim set of accounts it is. Now, we've got 6% inflation. Remember, about 2 years ago, the Minister of Justice, Minister of Finance and the Reserve Bank Governor said, oh, inflation will be transitory. It'll come and it'll go. It's going to come down fast. 2 years later, we've still got 6% inflation. We're in recession, and the government has managed to increase debt at the same time from $5 billion when they took over to $91 billion in 5 years. And they've increased government spending by 80%. And I defy a single person in this country to be able to stand up and say we've got an 80% better outcome in education or health or any area of government policy. And so this budget is the final budget in what has been 6 calamitous years for the New Zealand economy and everything else that hangs off it, Mr. Speaker. Now, we've heard for the last few days and the last few weeks, it seems to be the line from the Labor government spin machine that they're supposed to be empathetic. And so they keep on saying, yes, times are tough. Yes, it's very tough times for New Zealanders. It's been a difficult 3 years. Yes, and I heard the Prime Minister say people are grumpy. It's been a difficult time, very hard times. Well, they don't seem to appreciate that the reason for the hard times primarily is their own mismanagement of the economy and of this government. And they should take some responsibility for it and, frankly, hold their head in shame. So what did they inherit? And 6 years ago, they inherited a strong, positive, upbeat economy and a strong, positive, upbeat country where people looked and saw a great future for themselves and their family. We managed to absolutely to reverse the flow across the Tasman so that more people were coming to New Zealand from Australia than the other way around, and people felt like they could get ahead. Unfortunately, and everybody sees this right here, right now, too many New Zealanders are concluding, the 35,000 of them that left to go to Australia this year, too many are concluding that they don't actually have great opportunities in this country because the economy's not strong, because the cost of living is too high and inflation is not under control under this government. They've seen the $175 extra a week they're paying on average rents, driven largely by the misconceived and ill-considered housing policies of this government and their war on landlords, which has forced costs onto renters. They see the 9.6% increase in the cost of vegetables, the cauliflower, the squash, the pumpkins, and all these things that are the only thing the government can come up with is a harebrained scheme to exclude fresh fruit and vegetables from GST, which has gone down like a lead balloon because nobody can see the logic for it. They can't understand why it wouldn't apply to meat or nappies or any other things, and all it would do would be to mess up a simple system. And they've seen the $700 increase in fortnightly mortgage costs under this government, primarily because they haven't been able to control inflation properly. And so that's why National has come forward with a strong plan to get on top of the cost of living. We're going to get the Reserve Bank focused on its knitting, which is fighting inflation, not doing all the other things that the governor is keen to do, and the law requires them around employment. Secondly, we'll get government spending under control. That 80% increase in spending with very little to show for it is one of the reasons why we've had this burst of inflation in this country. Then we've got to deal with a government that keeps on adding costs to businesses, particularly small businesses, and then wonders why things are more expensive. And we've heard about the fair pay agreements, misnamed fair pay agreements. What they really are mandatory union deals to make our workplaces less flexible and less adaptable at a time when they need to be both those things. And we're going to repeal that. We'll get rid of it because we need to have flexibility in our employment relationships so that people can actually sort things out for themselves and work out what works for them. Then we've got to reduce taxes so that people aren't paying ever more taxes because the government is using that old trick that goes back hundreds of years, as if you have lots of inflation and people creep up the income tax brackets, they pay more tax, which is why I'm going to give. Well, that member's got an opportunity for a valedictory soon. But we've got, on average, $22,000 per household more in tax has been taken from this government. Can you believe that? $22,000 a year, on average, New Zealanders are paying more in tax under this government. $22,000. You can actually get a decent car for $22,000 every year for the extra money that this government is spending on tax. And what are we actually getting for it? What are you getting for it? Are we getting better education? Oh no, the kids don't even go to school. We don't get better education. Are we getting better health care? Well, no, you can wait forever for anything. You're not going to be getting inoculated from the various diseases because that's not working. You're going to have to wait ages for your hip replacements, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure you're not needing one yet, but and all these things are not. We're not seeing the improvement that we should be from the money that's been spent. 800, and then of course. That's only just the start of it. I mean, heaven forbid, if Grant Robertson got another chance to have another go at it, he'll be introducing his insurance tax, the jobs tax, which would be adding another $800 or so a year onto annual bills. They'll be coming back to their wealth tax. If the Greens had their say, they'd be coming back to the wealth tax. And so when it comes to the economy, this is the end of the budget, and it's a woeful budget, and it's the end of 6 years of economic mismanagement. Then we come to the other things. What do we come to? Well, what about law and order? What progress has been made on that? Now, if anybody is tempted to vote for the Greens, let me suggest this one to you, because it is their stated policy, and I'm glad we've got Ricardo Mendes March here. It's the stated policy of the Greens that if there's a warrant out for your arrest and you're on the run, you should still get your benefit. Because it's a nasty thing that the government currently does, that if you're on the run with a warrant out for your arrest, we cut your benefit. But no, the Greens think you should have some money when you're on the run and there's a warrant out for your arrest, and therefore you should still have your benefit. Well, I think that sums up everything you need to know about the Greens and law and order and welfare. And I think it also sums up how it all would work in a Labor-Greens government if they had their time. And so we've actually got to restore some law and order in this country and actually have real consequences for crime. And we go around the doorsteps. What do we hear from people? They're worried about what's going on in their communities. They see the increase in violent crime, 40% increase in violent crime, and they're perplexed and confused and can't understand why the only priority of the government that's been clearly articulated in the justice sector is to reduce the prison population by 30%, irrespective of what's going on in the community. That makes no sense to anybody, and it is part of the reason why we're having this breakdown in law and order that we're seeing. It's part of the reason why, frankly, Countdown is having to spend $45 million on fancy new trolleys that stop people from running out of their supermarkets without paying for the food, which is a metaphor. Which is a metaphor for everything that's wrong. I'll have you know that I'm a regular at Glen Innes Pack and Safe, and it's a good supermarket, and they shouldn't have to have electric trolleys that clam up because there is a breakdown on law and order in our supermarkets. And so it's a metaphor for how things have got out of control, and yet we've got a government whose only target in the whole justice sector is to make sure that we have fewer people in prison, irrespective of what's going on in our community. We think that's wrong, it's misguided, and we're going to change it. We're also going to get a little bit of clearer guidance around the sentencing principles so that we restrict the ability of judges to massively reduce sentences. So we've got to fix the economy, we've got to restore law and order. The third and fourth areas around health and education. And everybody is concerned about the decline in standards from education. And we've got a budget here where, like I say, government's increased spending by 80%. 80%. It's gone up to $137 billion a year, $61 billion more than what they started with. And yet, in education, fewer kids are going to school and they're not learning the basics, and so we've got to get back to the basics. And when it comes to health, it's about priorities, basically. We can't do everything, and this government thinks it's better that families that can afford to spend $5 to get their prescriptions shouldn't have to pay that money, and yet they don't have the resources to invest in 13 cancer drugs that will make a real difference to 1,000 people a year. And we think it's far better to use scarce healthcare resources to help those people who have got real serious cancers, rather than just putting another $5 into the hands of people who can perfectly afford to pay for their prescriptions. Now that, to me, sums up muddled priorities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.